Hello, my name is Kristiyana. I'm a pediatric neuro-oncologist or a brain tumor doctor. I spent a number of years working on bringing new cancer diagnostics to patients, and now my job is focused on bringing new drugs from the laboratory through early phase clinical trials. When I'm not working, I spend my time with my husband chasing after two kids who are 4 and 2, as well as our 9-year-old dog. Our daughter loves to learn about the immune system, and one of her favorite books is called Vaccines by Cara and John Florence. This is a book that we've read to her ever since she was an infant, and I truly believe this is one of the main reasons she actually enjoys going to the doctor's office and doesn't mind getting vaccines.
You ran a great PR campaign there. My name is Athalia, and I'm from London, but I live in Chicago. And I'm an oncology doctor who studies the immune system. And my current job is helping develop new drugs for cancer and for autoimmune diseases. My CV says that in my free time I have a bunch of hobbies, but the reality is, just like everyone else, I spend most of my free time doom scrolling and yelling at my husband or at our puppy that, Karen from the internet got it terribly wrong about X, Y, or Z. Which brings us to the motivation for starting this podcast, Malignant Myths.
Yeah. We wanted to create a space where we can discuss scientific and medical misinformation, debunk common myths, and review current events. In this episode, we're going to cover a topic that is fraught with myths, and that's vaccinations. Before we introduce our guest experts, let's set the scene. Athalia, what exactly is a vaccine? What's in it and how does it work?
Okay, great place to start. So, a vaccine is a medicine that triggers your immune system to protect you against getting a disease. And those traditional or old fashioned vaccines contain weakened or inactivated parts, chunks of a bacteria or a virus. Whereas the newer vaccines, like the mRNA vaccines, contain more like a blueprint, kind of the instruction manual for your own body to produce a really small amount of protein that looks kind of like the bacteria or the virus, which is really the ultimate hack to make your body protect yourself against the disease without really going anywhere near the germ. And sometimes vaccines also have extra ingredients called adjuvants, and these boost your immune system into being even more effective. It's kind of like taking a pre-workout before hitting the gym. Kristiyana, why don't you walk us briefly through how vaccines are developed and tested for safety?
Yeah. So vaccine development is a rigorous and lengthy process that involves many stages of research, testing, and regulatory review. It starts in the laboratory, often in collaboration with universities, continues through animal studies and clinical trials before a vaccine is approved for widespread use. And before a vaccine is shipped to your local pharmacy or doctor's office, it is often tested for safety in 20 to 30,000 different people. But still, some people will experience side effects, right? So why does that happen? And are there any, is there any cause for concern?
I mean, yes and no. You should always be concerned about, any kind of side effect that you have with any vaccine or medicine. That's like human nature, right? But where I think we haven't done a great job as a scientific and medical profession or community is really to explain to people why they have certain side effects of a vaccination and what that means is going on in your body. So vaccines, as we said, kind of trick your body into thinking it's seeing the disease in an effort to make you develop protection against future attack by the same disease. And when you catch a flu, you feel like crappy, right? Like my husband always gets man flu. And those symptoms, fever and chills and muscle aches, they're not actually due to the virus attacking your body. They're all part of your body's effort to destroy the virus and make those protective antibodies and blood cell memories required to stop you getting that same strain of flu in the future. So when you get a vaccine and your body is tricked into thinking you've been infected, you get a lot of those same symptoms. And you might say, well, Athalia, why bother then if I'm just going to feel sick with the disease and sick with the vaccine? And it's a great question. But the answer is that those symptoms last for a much shorter period of time. They won't be nearly as bad as having the actual disease. And really, the most important reason is that you're protected from those really feared and dangerous, most severe complications of having the actual disease itself when you get the vaccine. So things like pneumonia as a complication of shingles, or long COVID after getting COVID infection, or a child dying of measles.
So you can't actually catch the disease from the vaccine, right?
So there are some of the old-fashioned, those live vaccines, the ones with the kind of doses of a weakened but intact version of the germ that you very rarely can develop if your immune system is completely down, like if you're on chemo or you've had a stem cell transplant. And that's why those vaccines, those old-fashioned live vaccines, are not allowed for those really vulnerable patients. And that's why it's so important for us healthy folk to get those vaccines to reduce the amount of those germs that are going around in our communities, so we can protect those vulnerable patients that can't get certain live vaccines. And that's herd immunity, looking after our whole herd.
So this seems like a great spot to introduce our guests. We have two guest experts with us today. We're Michael Bozzella, who is a pediatric infectious disease doctor at Children's Hospital Colorado, and Dr. Karla Loken, who is an ObGyn, a healthcare leader, and a women's health advocate. Karla is a passionate and involved vaccine advocate since her sister died from meningitis in 1988. And now there are adequate vaccinations to prevent this disease. Karla, tell us about your sister. What was she like?
Sure. Well, first, let me start with this is a great Colorado connection because I was raised in Colorado, and we had just spent a wonderful week of skiing up at Keystone with my cousins and family. My sister was 16, almost 17, and we both had just a passion for downhill skiing. And then she also played tennis. And she worked at a restaurant, and just your very typical teenager. And I was 14, she was 16. And she went out with her friends and came home early, like a responsible, she was pretty 4.0, driven student, wanted to go to nursing school, and had been out shopping that day for a tennis skirt for the new tennis season that was going to start on Monday. She had a date for prom for the first time that was coming up, and we were looking at prom dresses. And then she had gone out with her friends and came home early because she had a headache and she had to work the next morning. So she said, I'm going to go to bed early. And she worked at a Perkins restaurant, which is like a family style pancake house. And she got up in the morning and very responsible, got in her car and drove out of the driveway. And then I remember her driving back in and telling my mom, you got to call my boss. I've got the worst headache. I cannot work. And she would never have called off work. She was just so responsible, and she didn't want to let her team down. Really, would be her kind of personality. And she went to bed, and my mom, and dad kind of took care of her while she had what we thought was the flu. And it was a really busy weekend. We were moving some grandparents into a home that they had house sat. And so my mom and dad were back and forth during the day, but I remember my mom coming back to see her around 4 o'clock in the afternoon and said, hey, maybe you'll feel better if you take a shower. And she was just throwing up a lot, and just very typical fever, high fever though, and the headache was really bad. And she said, I'm going to call the doctor. And we lived out in the country. So our family doctor said, I'll meet you in town and give you some suppositories for the nausea. So in that transition, she said, well, before we do that, we'll get you in the shower. And when she went to get her in the shower, she had this rash all over her back, which we know now was petechiae, which is a very classic meningitis rash. And so they took her to the hospital, and immediately the emergency room knew what they were dealing with. There just was nothing other than supportive care that they can give when it's Men-B. They didn't know right away the strain of meningitis, but the doctors recognized fairly quickly. And they actually flew in an infectious disease doctor from Children's Hospital to my town in northern Colorado. But by the time she got there, there was really nothing anyone could do. So she passed very quickly within about 12 hours. She went into cardiac arrest and sepsis and passed away. And so at that time in 1988, there were vaccines for A, C, Y, and W given to the military and people going to college. But even when I rotated in medical school at the University of Colorado, we're just going to keep going back to Colorado. The doctors in infectious disease said, well, it doesn't kill enough kids and there'll probably never be a vaccine for that because no one will ever work on that. It's not enough and it doesn't affect enough lives. And come full circle, when my kids were teenagers in 2014, there were actually 2 vaccines released after several outbreaks of MenB in the United States at several college universities, including Princeton and Santa Clara. And that really took that episode of that to get everyone to work together and drop their academic affiliations and their industry affiliations and all the boundaries, kind of when we think about COVID and how everybody worked together. This really was the momentum to get this MenB vaccine launched, and now it's been available for several years. So it's very exciting to work on that side and be able to offer families something to prevent this.
Does it feel very like full circle when I'm sure very profound experience when you're able to be involved in the decision for someone to vaccinate against this particular disease?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is it's very healing for my parents who are non-medical, but also for me as a medical professional, because I've seen meningitis across my career as well, or sepsis in any way, to know that there's something that we can offer. And then just a way to be involved in that education and advocacy as a physician actually was something that led to some of my career development and my path in my career. So it's been really twofold. And then I think just having kids myself and knowing, I left Purdue's campus the other day when I dropped off my son, and I drove out and there was a sign that said, we require MenB education. And just knowing that the colleges in the state I'm in, because of the advocacy, require parents to be educated about their choices on vaccines is really important.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. We really appreciate it.
So now that we have vaccines that are safe and effective for meningitis as well as many other diseases, it is interesting to see that hesitancy around vaccines seems to be at an all-time high. And Michael, you're a pediatric infectious disease expert. Why do you think that is? Do you think it stems from side effects related to vaccines? Is this a fair assumption, or do you think there are other factors that explain this surge in hesitancy?
No, I really think there's a lot of things that go into it. Like there's sometimes particular psychology that can make people more vaccine hesitant, or really at the end of the day, it boils down to a lot of fear. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And honestly, even like some scientific concepts are difficult to comprehend. Honestly, I'm Peds ID. I think about bugs and drugs and vaccines day in and day out, but even some of the finer aspects of immunology are difficult even for me to wrap my head around. But while, yes, it may seem like vaccine hesitancy is an all-time high now, it's something that's been around since the dawn of vaccines. You can look back in old newspaper clippings from days of like using cowpox vaccine as a way to immunize against smallpox. And there were anti-vaccine advocates that would have these publishments of people basically turning into cows or having little cow horns or things grow off of their bodies because they got the cowpox immunization. So there's definitely that fear of the unknown and not understanding the why. But part of that too, like a lot of things in science, it's been a bumpy road. Stuff happens. There are accidents along the way. Like back in the day of during the 50s with the really bad polio outbreaks here in the United States, the development of the vaccine, there was this awful incident where one version of the vaccine was essentially using the oral polio, so this was a live vaccine, essentially was released to the public and it wasn't fully attenuated. So you had a lot of kids that actually got polio and went on to develop poliomyelitis because of this. And that, like, things like that really instill this fear or this worry or this concern. And then even more recently with the DTaP, it used to be a wholesale pertussis vaccine rather than this acellular. And around the 80s, there was this big concern that kids were getting this and going on to develop febrile seizures or developmental delays, only for us to later find out these kids all had something called Dravet syndrome. This was an underlying genetic disorder and one of those common adverse reactions of fevers just happen to be the trigger that we'd see in some of these kids. So there's a lot of that stuff that really goes into it. There have been some great, more studies trying to look at the psychology of some of what goes into making people more vaccine hesitant. And one great study that in 2023 kind of boiled it down to 3 groups, trying to look at like what are these anchors or these psychological profiles that make people more likely to be vaccine hesitant. One common theme that came up is this idea of people that tend to be more vaccine hesitant are maybe the ones that are more likely to grasp onto things like conspiracy theories or alternative hypotheses. People who are looking more to social or cultural context rather than science to back up what they're believing in. Another group may be people that tend to be more social conservative. So there's these people maybe have a high degree of moral religiosity or a lot of moral rigidity or very rooted in tradition, and they don't like things to change, essentially. And another group still like the free market ideology, in the sense like you can't tell me what to do. And so that's just some of like what may go into this. But honestly, with a lot of the conversations that I have with families, particularly in the hospital, a more common theme is just this fear of the unknown and really wanting to protect their kid. And even the staunchest anti-vaccine or vaccine hesitant people, they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're trying to protect their child, and they just don't fully understand or don't know what is the right thing to do.
How do you think outbreaks of public health crises like the COVID-19 pandemic influence people's trust in vaccines?
Unfortunately, a lot. At first, when the pandemic broke out, there was a lot of public outcry. Let's get some vaccines. Let's get the science. Let's get this stuff rolling. But I think a big piece of what happened in the pandemic, particularly, was a lot of the messaging that went out. Like, people sometimes fail to realize that science changes. It's constantly evolving. Heck, half the stuff we were taught in med school was obsolete by the time that we graduated. And honestly, like even keeping up with what's going on in science is sometimes trying to like drink from a fire hose. There's just so much information out there. And I think part of that was lost with the general public. We were constantly learning new things about the virus, how it was transmitted, how sick people got it, what were the predisposing factors that make somebody more susceptible to this. And just because of this ever-changing message, that really was the seed of confusion, I think helped make things worse or really lead to this initial distrust of the vaccine. And especially when the vaccine first came out, it was like, yes, let's get it. Let's everybody get it. But then you started to see, but wait, it's a new technology, this mRNA stuff, this hasn't been around. And so you're still getting back into that fear of the unknown and not really understanding where this is coming from. And just became this awful snowball effect that really just capitalized on people's fear. And unfortunately, I think a big piece of what was going on at that time too, at least in the United States, politicization. Like it's one of those things like politics and science, one of my super nerdy podcasts, like when they say when the two of them mix, you come out with politics. Like the science just gets drowned out and the message gets lost and people start using these alternative messages for their own good.
It's so interesting, the politicization of it. I'm English, we don't learn American history that well, I will say, in the UK, but I was reading about the polio epidemic, and it spanned like a Republican and a Democrat administration, and it seemed like there was consensus. No one sort of woke up one day and was like, you know what, this is the thing that I can capitalize on, not for capital, not for money, but for votes. And it feels like now it's just been stolen by politicians as a means to go one way or go the other way.
Yeah, for
I think
sure.
it's really been difficult for people in the science community to have. You used to go to your science professor and you don't need to know somebody's politics. You knew that they believed in science and their ethics. And I think we have had a rocky road, like Michael said, that there was actually an author who published things and has admitted, Andrew Wakefield, that he lied in his research, and he is basically the creator of the theory that vaccines caused autism and created this fear amongst the population. And so I don't think we were ever historically that your politics was tied to how you thought about science until COVID. And I think that was a very major shift. I think the other part of this is our scientific education in the United States. We have literally dropped the science requirements in our high schools. For general biology, over a third of kids graduate high school now without a general biology course or a general understanding of how their own body works. We deal with this in my profession in gynecology all the time because women don't even know what body parts they have, let alone at the cellular level or to identify what a virus actually is. So we kind of have been fighting this for quite a while, and it really boils down to our education. And then I think our level of that natural intuition to research yourself, do the research yourself. We are now capable of doing research ourselves, but we don't teach people how to research good sources. And so whatever is put in front of somebody is what they digest. And we talk about that. But what we talk about when we're a vaccine advocate is keep putting that good information in front of people. And as a trusted healthcare partner, as a doctor or as a nurse who's recommending the vaccines, a school nurse, we tend to get that message out a lot better because people do trust you. And they do value your education. It's how you speak to them that really matters, not being condescending and really having that conversation of, hey, these are vaccines. They can protect you from cancer. They can protect you from this deadly disease like meningitis. They can protect you from the flu, all of these things. And tell me, how does it make you feel when I'm offering these vaccines to you? Why are you hesitant? Can I ease your fears? And having that conversation really leads to an uptake in at least getting educated. That's step one. And most of those people, and I will tell you, even when the teenagers hear these conversations, they will circle back when they're 18 at college. There's a great book called Educated that talks about this. They can make their own decisions once they're 18. A lot of these kids will turn around and come back and get vaccinated.
They're fighting social media, right? They're fighting disinformation from, I know how much of the day I spend on my phone. Kids are spending even more. And, we can be sat there in clinic as clinicians and say, this is what we recommend based on what we've been studying in the lab and in the clinic. But then if someone's going home and just listening to hours and hours of propaganda, then how do we fight that, and also how do we hold those social media companies accountable for misinformation? Parliament, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think it's really, really hard. And we deal with this, especially right now in women's health. We have a lot of misinformation just in general around, but I'll take the HPV vaccine for an example. There was basically a hysteria around a vaccine that was developed for cancer. And our messaging was that HPV is sexually transmitted. And that did carry over into a lot of religious and a lot of socially conservative factors about how we spread the messaging around this vaccine. And then the other thing was people got scared because they heard stories of people's kids having seizures or getting this really awful Guillain-Barré syndrome, where it is a neurologic condition, which it didn't happen that way. And we see other countries that have nearly 100% vaccination rate with the same vaccine, and they've almost eliminated cervical cancer. So we know what the truth is. We can look at Australia and show the data. But hysteria only takes a little bit of, it's like a weed in the garden. It takes just a little bit of water to make that weed grow, and you leave for a week and you come back and it's 6 feet tall. And if you don't keep gardening, and that's what I call the education around vaccines, is we will be overgrown with misconceptions because it's easier to spread propaganda than it is to teach science.
Right. But as you say, as you said in this episode, the more good information that we can put out there, the easier it is to combat the disinformation. But there is a lot of misinformation out there, and I really wanted to ask, perhaps Mike, you can take this one. How can people, without that in-depth science background and education, how can people distinguish between credible scientific sources and then kind of pseudo-scientific misinformation? What are the kind of the red flags that people should look out for when they're on TikTok or whatever?
And that's the $1 million question. I think one of the easiest things to always remind yourself at the end of the day, or that I talk with families about, is that at the end of the day, whatever you're listening to or whatever you're watching on TikTok or YouTube or whatever is trying to sell you something, chances are this isn't a site that you should be listening to. Um, Another thing that I try to talk about with families too is trying to like look for sources. People that have true information or evidence-based information that they're sharing, they won't hide where they're getting this from. They won't give you hearsay or anecdotes. They'll actually say, this is a study, or this is the resource, or this is what we've gone to. But it's kind of a fine line to walk, because there's been a lot of great research kind of going into the behavioral science behind having these hard conversations with families. And it's really almost to the point where there's something called this recall bias, where if you try to directly address myths like that or hitting this information too hard, you'll almost reinforce some of those concepts. So it's a fine line where you want to address this, take it down, but rather than keep harping on like this one site that they're listening to or this myth, try to reframe or redirect or say, like, I know that some of my families, I say, like, yes, I know there's a lot of bad information out there. The interweb is a dark and scary place. But then I present them with good, trusted resources that I say, these are some great places that I go to for information. And one particularly wonderful website that I always talk about is Voices for Vaccines. This is a great website that's a lot of information by families for families. It really tries to get things down on that, just like the level of the general public, to really communicate some of those tough topics. Because I think that's the other big thing, that when you're having those conversations with people too, is people want the dumbed down, the simplest explanation. And that's, again, sometimes I think is lost in our scientific communication. Like, there's so much that goes into even saying a simple sentence about, like, yes, vaccines work, but there's like decades of work that go into being able to prove that or say that. And just that's why I think some of that messaging also gets lost or difficult. And I'm sorry, I'm very prone to tangents, and I think I might start to go off on one then.
Oh, it's a great tangent to go off of. I think COVID was such a great example of that kind of PR campaign that we really failed as a profession to really have people understand why it was that we were able to get. I say we like I was involved. I really was not involved. But as we as a profession were able to get this amazing vaccine, which with the initial strains of COVID was very effective, out so quickly, and that had a lot of suspicion how they were able to get it out. Maybe they were planning this, maybe people didn't realize, because we didn't tell them that mRNA vaccines have been being studied for decades for cancer, and we can do another entire episode on cancer vaccines. But for this purpose of this episode, suffice it to say that it was a plug and play situation. All we needed was a new target to put into the platform that had been developed already, and we were ready to go at warp speed, the name of the project. And to demonstrate my non-partisan agenda with this episode, it was a credit to the administration at the time that initially that vaccine was able to be gotten out.
And I will say that was almost that same thing, that Operation Warp Speed was almost a shot in the foot, because like a lot of conversations that I have, like, honestly, and I will, taking a step back to, we talk a lot about vaccine hesitancy or vaccine refusal. Like, the absolute vaccine refusal rates are still super low. Like, fewer than 5% of the population are like flat out like, we will nothing. A lot of people are really on that spectrum. It's anywhere, in some studies, anywhere from 25 to 50%. Then we're on that hesitancy spectrum. And so just they have some doubts, they have some questions that, just like Karla was saying, if you just try to address them in that empathetic, easy communication, just trying to tease apart all of the crap and get down to the core issue that you can try to address directly, goes a long way to helping people flip that side. Yeah. But even like going back to what you were talking about with the warp speed, that speed is something that is so commonly cited to me as like why I'll have families that have gotten literally everything else or even up to date on the HPV, and all of a sudden like, but we don't get the flu and we don't get the COVID because we don't believe in that, it came out too fast. And it's like hearing things like that, and like just like you're saying, like sometimes that even the speed there, and trying to readdress and like help them to understand just what you were saying, like actually this technology we've been trying to develop for 20 years. And trying to have that conversation, like there are a lot of different types of vaccine platforms out there, but the same platform won't work for every disease. We have to figure out like what's the best way to teach your immune system. And so
I tell people we got really lucky with COVID that we had all the science that we had. leading up to it. And I think one of the things that, even helped my own parents and other family is to tell them that I was working with mRNA when I was in college and undergrad doing research. And we had this very early technology, and I'm going to age myself because it was when we were first pulling out and doing our own Western blots, and no one does that anymore. But we have had this technology for a long time. We didn't have the ability to mass produce it. One of the things you said, though, Mike, that I love is if somebody's listening, this information is on TikTok or Instagram, they may be trying to sell you something. And there are a lot of doctors out there trying to do a lot of good educational podcasts. That's what this podcast is. And they do have to survive on sponsorship. So I think you've got to kind of draw that fine line. It's no longer a never sell anything or never be sponsored. And I think that kind of goes along with, we have rules like the Sunshine Act for the pharma companies and what they can advertise to patients, and where all of this became, the ability to advertise new medications on TV and direct to the consumer. We don't have those rules or those standards in industry around social media advertising. As far as misinformation, we really are fighting an uphill battle there. Also, credibility. Anyone can be an expert and claim to be an expert. So that's that critical piece, is how do you know somebody's truly an expert in their field? I'll tell people I'm not an expert in infectious disease. I'm pretty good with vaccines because I've been an advocate for 14 years and I am a physician. And I'm really good with all the ones you need in pregnancy and what your baby should get right when you're born. But there are definitely ones that I don't know as well. I was just learning about that if I get my Shingrix vaccine, it could help me prevent Alzheimer's, and some great studies there. But there's just, like you said, Mike, so much knowledge to be absorbed. The other part is other doctors who are vaccine hesitant are feeding into this problem. And we are educating people in medical school. I think it should be a requirement for medical school to come in and know your stance on science, but we can't do that, right? Like, we can't filter people out and say, are you going to go out and practice one way or another way? We hope you're going to practice science. That's what we all take an oath to do. But there seems to be a breakdown in that fundamental.
I think you bring up a great point there. And something else that you had actually asked was about how do we hold those companies or social media things accountable. And there's not too much that we can do. Like, even flagging things as presenting misinformation only goes so far. But I really liked what you were saying, Karla, is even this podcast is just going out there, speaking your truth, saying these things, talking about these things, and even off of social media, just having these conversations with your friends, with your family, saying, oh yeah, I got my flu shot today, I'm going to go, did you get yours yet? Or just making it a part of the normal conversation and keeping it from being this taboo subject. Because just like you said too, Karla, you had mentioned that as physicians or people in the medical field, people tend to trust us. So they go to us for information still, despite people trying to weaponize things for one way or the other. There are great studies and survey work that have looked at those people that are on the fence or trying to make those decisions. The reasons that they've changed their mind are because they have gone to their physician, their family doc, their pediatrician to have those conversations. So even if you're not out there trying to get a million views or something, you can still have an impact just by talking about things and trying to be that positive spokesperson for vaccines.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned the most about, I've been on the board of the Indiana Immunization Coalition, and then I'm on the board for the Society for the Prevention of Meningitis. And one of the things that is even the reason Kristiyana knew to come to me with this topic is that I show up authentically and consistently in what I put out on social media. There's 2 times a year that I support a meningitis race. I invite everybody to come to Northern Colorado and run Sierra's race. It's awesome. We give vaccines after the race. I've consistently, for over 18 years now, been posting about this one race twice a year, about my sister on her birthday and on the anniversary of her death. And everybody knows it's coming. They know when. But I use that story as a chance to get my message out. And then I interact with true experts like Paul Offit. I'm so honored that he'll even take my connection on LinkedIn. Like, these are my heroes. And I see Michael smiling when I say these names, because these truly are the heroes. If people don't know, they invented the vaccine for RSV, and babies get RSV and they die. And it's the number one cause for NICU hospitalizations, and the cost of healthcare could just change dramatically for our pediatricians by this one vaccine, and just the amount of work these people have done in this field. But showing up authentically and consistently in your social media builds trust, and then people do reach out to you. I get called all the time. I know you will know, and you will be so surprised at who comes back around. And then I think also, you said it, Mike, how you talk to parents. We have to be able to say a lot of medical things at a level of education that is for the non-scientist. And we say that we're at a 5th grade level of education for most Americans when we talk about our science education. So it's not like dumbing it down, it's just using the right words. And then it's not being condescending. And I always found in my practice, especially during pregnancy, even if a vaccine was recommended in the first trimester, like flu vaccine, as long as I got it to them by the 2nd trimester, I was doing better than not getting it at all. So just showing up consistently and saying, hey, okay, you don't have to get them all at once, or we can spread them out. Now, that's not the recommendation, but if you're hesitant, we can meet you in the middle.
I've got a hard question along those lines. Maybe Kristiyana or Mike can take this. As a pediatrician, when you have a family that's vaccine hesitant to the degree where they are not planning on giving any vaccines at this time, how do you approach that? How do you approach the discussions about different schedules? I've heard of practices firing patients. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Kristiyana, how did you approach that when you were in practice?
Yeah, so I remember, and each clinic probably has a different policy, but Mike, you probably remember when we were residents, we worked with families to build alternative schedules and try to accommodate and educate as much as possible. But if families persistently refuse to vaccinate, period, we had fired patients in the past. And the main reason is to protect the rest of the patients who are coming to that practice and are in your waiting rooms, and you don't want to expose them to dangerous viruses and bacteria. But I do know that different practices have different policies. One thing that I think is really interesting is we've boarded our dog a number of times, and dog boarding facilities are very strict about vaccines. Even if you are a day late, we've had times where we had to urgently change our accommodations for our dog because we were literally one day behind on a vaccine, because they keep such a good record. And our veterinarian even hadn't alerted us yet, or maybe we just haven't updated the paperwork, and they're just so strict. And if a dog's a day late on a vaccine, they can't be boarded. But for humans, we tend to be a lot more lenient, and even schools would often allow exemptions based on ethical or religious concerns. And so essentially, anyone could say that they have reservations and allow for children to not be vaccinated. So, perhaps we're a little too lenient, and I don't know what the right balance is.
I got to tell you, the vaccine hesitancy is a thing in the veterinary world as well. I recently posted on a Facebook Black Labrador group, because we have a Black Lab puppy, and I posted about his fear phase that poor Kevin is going through right now in his adolescence. He's scared of ants. It's a big deal. And someone wrote, it's the tick vaccine, it's the flea vaccines you're giving him. And I just thought, crikey, wow, it's come to this as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a great example, though, that you could use is, what, your pet doesn't go away to camp without getting the vaccines, because we want to protect your pet. Wouldn't you want the same thing for your children?
Yeah.
One of the biggest things working in vaccine advocacy, too, is learning how much the school system actually does. I did not know. I wasn't a pediatric resident since I did obstetrics, and we didn't learn a lot about CHIRP in the United States or the vaccine record keeping, and then how important school nurses are in educating parents and keeping those records. The other thing is I would highly invite anyone to come to the vaccine clinics we have for anybody who's coming from a foreign clinic or any refugee clinics. We do routine refugee clinics, and I mean, they will come in and line up and stand for 6 hours and wait their turn to get 8, 10, whatever number of vaccines that were not available to them in their home country, because they have seen typhoid, they have seen diphtheria, they have seen it all rip through a village. I had a 10-year-old from Tanzania get all her vaccines, and she was so brave, and she was just getting them all at once. And I said, "Are you sure you want them all?" I want them all. And she could name relatives that had died of the different vaccines we were giving her that day, multiple relatives. So for her, the opportunity to be here and then be able to get these vaccines was just huge for her, like life-changing. And when you tell stories like that, I think we need to share that with people who are here that haven't seen that, because I think they've forgotten, you know.
I was going to say, you all brought up some phenomenal topics, and bear with me for a second. But like the one thing you just said, Karla, like it's brought up so often that vaccines are a victim of their own success for every reason that you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The younger generation, especially like it's like actually more like the millennial generation tends to be among the parents that are more vaccine hesitant, in large part because they've forgotten. We didn't see these things. We didn't grow up with kids that got poliomyelitis or had to spend the rest of their lives in iron lungs. We didn't see all the deaths or the long-term horrible outcomes from meningococcal infections, from Haemophilus influenza type B, meningitis. We didn't see all of these things, so we've forgotten about them. They've become these specters in the dark that people think like, oh, we don't need to worry about that. We don't see that anymore. But it's like, and part of what you brought up too is like sharing those conversations or sharing those stories. A big part about relating to those families that are super vaccine hesitant or really scared about stuff, you have to bring up a lot of those concepts of that motivational interviewing to really get to the heart of the matter. And kind of what you were saying too, Karla, about like having to be able to discuss the scientific information, sometimes that backfires. Sometimes families don't need that or don't want that. Yes, she may have like a family of engineers that like, yes, give me the numbers, give me the data. Great, it works for them, but it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You have to, like, when you have those families that are more operating on that fear-based or that worry or that concern, having those relatable stories, being able to tell or share things like just what you said about that your refugee clinic, being able to share personal stories. I have a good friend that works in a more rural area of Maine, where when she deals with those families, she will tell the stories of like, hey, yeah, no, I have 2 daughters at home too, and they don't like getting their shots, but I know they have all of them. They've gotten up to date. And a great approach that she takes is that she's very cognizant of, and especially where I'm even in Colorado, there are healthcare deserts out there. So sometimes you're the only doctor for miles in any direction. And if you fire these patients, where are they going to go? They're going to go to urgent cares or EDs or get less great care, lose that preventative medicine. So it's really about that risk tolerance or building that relationship with the family. So, okay, maybe you're not going to vaccinate, but we're going to work together. Like we're going to have you only come in at a certain time of day if you're worried about a fever thing. But the other approach that my friend takes is that she's very upfront and she tells all of her families, I know that you said no before, but I'm going to talk about the flu vaccine every damn time that you come in here. We're going to have this conversation every time. We're not going to stray away from this. And this is just the way that I practice medicine. And that's the way this is going to be. Because sometimes just having those conversations over again, building that relationship, that rapport helps like kind of like get in there, get that foot in the door to be able to have those chances of success.
And the last, we all have like those toolkits that we employ during consultations, and everyone probably has a slightly different toolkit. And one I used as an oncologist that I wanted to bring up, which I relied upon all the time, was that, you know, there's so much in life that we can't control. We can't control that your breast cancer came back again. We can't control that you're having this side effect to your chemotherapy. But what we can control, which is an amazing gift that we've been given, is to reduce your risk of getting really bad flu or whatever it is that I was trying to advocate that my patient got. But we're about at time, and I wanted to give Karla, as our vaccine advocate, the last word. If someone is listening to this podcast and is unsure about vaccines, with your story and your career in vaccine advocacy, what do you want to say to them directly, to kind of sum everything up and as a farewell?
I just applaud that you guys are tackling this issue as a pair and as a topic of scientific endeavor for you guys as a podcast of putting out and finding good speakers that can speak to this very authentically and educatedly. I think the other thing is to tell people that there are resources that are trusted. You just mentioned a toolkit. We made toolkits for meningitis. We will give them to doctors. We'll give them to school nurses. There are resources available to help you if you're a clinician and you're struggling with this in your practice. And then I think the biggest thing, and Mike just said it, is we cannot alienate patients, and we need to keep building that trust, and that takes time. And if we give up on building that trust, we will lose this battle. But if we continue to build the trust in the community, as well as with our peers and with other people, just getting science out there. And we do know that there will be mistakes made in science. I was never perfect with a scalpel. We say this all the time. There is going to be that time when you weren't right as a physician. You cannot be perfect. We are human first. But if we can come at this together and build, it's a lot better conversation and we get a lot better results. And I find it ironic that people, even that are hesitant today, say, "Oh, I just like to go to, a measles party and get exposed a little bit." And I'm like, well, guess what? You just explained what a vaccine was. They're like, really? And it's like, oh, back up. If you just start from what it is.
Clicking.
Yeah, it's a great spot to end on. And I want to thank you, Karla and Mike, both so much for being our guests this week. And thank you to everyone listening. We're going to put links to all of the resources and toolkits that Karla mentioned on the website. And yeah, farewell for now.